Please join me in praying that I don't say something we all regret. These are dangerous times. Mr. President, are you sure about this? It's not a coincidence that in the scriptures poverty is mentioned more than 2,100 times.
Look in my eyes, what do you see?
These issues are as alive as they ever were.
Neon lights, Nobel Prize, when a mirror speaks, the reflection lies.
This is not about charity, it's about justice.
I know your anger, I know your dreams.
But justice and equality are mates, aren't they? Justice always wants to hang out with equality, and equality is a real pain in the ass.
I'm the smiling face of your TV.
I changed the channel.
Oh, there's a law of compensation, and there's an accounting to be held, an accounting that shall make the Depression of 1929 seem as a prosperity when it breaks upon you.
Only you can set you free. The cult of personality.
People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people.
You gave me fortune. You gave me fame. You gave me power in your God's name.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Indigenous Nightmare Network. My name is Isaac Jasper. I am also the Indigenous Nightmare. Today's conversation is going to be with Prince Shakur. As soon as he's able to come in, I just wanted to have a couple of minutes to go over some stuff that I'm going to be coming out with and get that over with before we get into this conversation. Today, for those that actually read my article, today is what I consider Article Thursday, and it's where I submit or publish my article on Substack, and then the next day or a couple days after, I'd like to have a conversation regarding said article. And it's kind of a cycle that I'm getting back into since I have what I like to call I don't have writer's block anymore. I'm able to write freely throughout the day, certain times of the day and whatnot. So yeah, I just wanted to give news of that before Prince comes in and kind of go over what this article is that's going to be coming out. The article is Sand Branch and Why Socialists Should Care from a Marxist / Pan-Africanist perspective. And so that'll be published on Substack within the next hour or two. And it kind of goes over a lot of information that I have not been holding back on, but due to my writer's block, I wasn't able to articulate the story well. So this time around, I was able to compile up my notes, my analysis, conversations that I had with individuals within Sand Branch that I could speak to, some of which only wanted to speak if I was in person, which I'm financially not able to do so at the moment. So I went with just the investigative information that I had came up with and, compiled that with what I thought was an avenue for people to look at why capitalism is the way that it is, because it creates these mini it creates food deserts, it creates unincorporated, quote unquote, unincorporated cities, which just are cities that the state tries to deem unincorporated for reasons of trying to steal the land or trying to acquire the land for commercial or consumptional value and whatnot. So that's the article that will be coming out today. in probably the next hour and a half. As soon as I am done with the conversation again with Prince Shakur, we're going to be going over today why Billy Porter must be stopped. And I'm going to see if I can wiggle in a couple more questions regarding his book, regarding also the encampments, and see if I could wiggle those two a couple questions regarding those two topics in. But I'm very excited to have this conversation with Prince. I have been a follower of the YouTube channel that they conduct, and it is by far something. I wrote in on Instagram, a writer of my era. I'm only 27. I'm not really too sure how old Prince is, but I believe we're relatively close in age. And uh someone of my era to be overlooked and underrated as such, via the memoir that they've written, the articles, and just the analysis that they've been able to conduct and actually shed a light on why Billy Porter does not need to be playing this role, a biopic of any sort, and in actuality, why making movies about radical individuals under a capitalist construct is just it's non-feasible, because they're never going to get the true story right. And I think James Baldwin essentially talked about that, and why he felt that he was essentially a part of a second assassination of his friend, when writing the script, or manuscript of said autobiography. So I'm very excited to have this conversation with Prince. I'm very excited to. This is actually something, like when you sit down and you kind of wonder, well, who do you want, to have on, like, who do you think you can potentially get, who will answer the call. And this is one that really surprised me. I wasn't really too sure that Prince relatively had the time, or I was even in the realm of I just really didn't think that this was going to be possible. And so this is, for me, it's very exciting. I don't want to sound like a fan, but I do admire and give flowers where flowers are should be given. And this is an individual I feel that, again, is completely you know overlooked, and it put in a position. I guess I'm throwing way too many flowers. I'm just really excited to have this conversation. This topic is it's gotten weird in the last couple months, because what we've seen is just a complete co-opt. And it's not even just James Baldwin. We've seen recently with Apple, TV co-opting the life of Huey P. Newton. We see Netflix with Bayard Rustin, and I forget the other one, the other movie bio that they did, where they completely just shitted on Stokely Carmichael, didn't even reference him or recognize him, just completely erased him from history within the context of the movie. Um, and so we see that with Judas and the Black Messiah. Um, not being able to tell stories, and now we have an individual who is openly, avidly sides with Zionism, has even went as far to kiss the hand of the, what I like to call, mass murderer, for he is the one who is okaying all of these bombs, all of this money to be sent for Israel to bomb Israel, for all of these Western imperialist constructs, as there's 1,000 military bases across the globe that are one of the main focal points of why climate is the way that it is today. So to know that this individual, Billy Porter, has said that it's not his quote unquote hill to stand on when it comes to speaking in advocacy and in solidarity with Palestinian lives, and has even went as to go as far as to side with Zionists, with avid and open Zionists. I mean, he kissed the hand of the dirtiest one of them all, Biden. So I'm just very excited to have this conversation. I did start this um, this live 10 minutes before Prince got here so that I can kind of get my little jitters out and whatnot, and then also get out there that the article will be out after this conversation, and I will be hopefully, if I can. If I can't, it's all good. If I can't get on today to discuss that said article, then I will be back on tomorrow for said article. So okay, here we go. Hello, can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
Okay,
Hello.
I can hear you now.
Hello. Well, to my viewers, if you are not aware, Prince Shakur is a writer, an author, a poet, someone who, in my opinion, as I just for 10 minutes threw flowers at you, you were not here to catch those. You are an individual who I feel is like avidly like overlooked when it comes to conversations like such, when it comes to Billy Porter, when it comes to, I mean, you sparking the conversation on if Malcolm X is bisexual, which thank you for that. So today's conversation, I would deeply love for us to break down why Billy Porter needs to be stopped and why we need to stop looking at celebrities to commodify, steal, co-opt legacies of radical thinkers like James Baldwin. I just referenced Bayard Rustin. I referenced also, I mean, MLK, Malcolm X, Judas and the Black Messiah, with Fred Hampton. Something's coming up with, I think, Stokely Carmichael, with Kwame
Really?
Ture. If I'm not mistaken, and maybe I fell down a rabbit hole that I shouldn't have gone down, but for the most part, it looked reminiscently legit. So I'm hoping that it doesn't happen. But you came to this or I came to this conversation or this area about this said topic from your videos. So I'm coming from a realm of, okay, now I get to understand why Billy Porter ain't shit, why he does not need to play James Baldwin, and also, where he stands in this whole Israel Gaza situation. So I'd love for you, if you can, to break down how you came up with all of this information and have essentially sparked, I feel you have, I don't know, maybe if someone else has been speaking, as avidly as you have on this topic, but how did you come to this conclusion that Billy Porter should not play James Baldwin?
Lord, that's a good question. Well, yeah, first, thank you for having me here. I really appreciate this. I really appreciate having the space to talk about it, because I think it's important, especially as a Black person, to talk about, or just like for anyone. But I think the reason I've gone so hard about talking about it online, especially related to Billy Porter, is because he's also Black, because he's also queer. And I think there's a lot of danger in how identity and representation can put certain people in high places, and we assume that they have the moral high ground, or we assume that they are well-meaning, or we assume that their politics or their end goal aligns with us. So I think it's always important to start it from that standpoint. But for me, at least, I learned about the biopic, I can't remember how soon after Billy Porter or Allen Media Group announced it. And in a lot of ways, immediately I was skeptical, because one, I am just very wary of a lot of biopics in general. I mean, aside from even like Black biopics, like the Elvis biopic that came out like a year and a half ago was one of the worst things I've ever fucking seen in my life. And I walked out of the theater 2 hours in out of the 3 hours. And so I think on one level, I'm just extremely skeptical of biopics. And then I'm also extremely skeptical of how Black history is so often utilized during moments of illusory progress in terms of the American project. And I feel like right now, it's the whole like, will Biden win? Will Trump win? It's Pride Month, it's Juneteenth. Anytime an election year is like heading towards us, I always understand that identity will be at the forefront. So many people's identities will be weaponized. And so I think the convergence of all of these things, one, made me hyper aware. Of course, October 7th happened last year. And since then, the genocide against Palestinians has only continued and increased. And so I think all of these things made me deeply aware of how a figure like James Baldwin being pushed to the forefront and highlighted. Like 2024 is also James Baldwin's 100th birthday. So it's also really vital that we look at like what that even means. But
Exactly.
essentially with Baldwin being such an internationalist, such a humanist, such an advocate for decolonization, such an advocate like for supporting Palestine and being against settler colonization, especially as like a Black traveler, because I think Baldwin very much understood that Americans, Black Americans, Westerners can go to other parts of the world and act out of privilege, suck things from the environment, have reductive perspectives on those spaces. And so to have a figure like James Baldwin being documented, covered, represented, especially during this like really important time, to me, I'm just like, I'm gonna call whatever I considered my community out. And I think as soon as I started just reading a little bit into it and that Guardian interview came out, for those that don't know, like Billy Porter did a Guardian interview a number of months ago, and that's where a lot of the controversy sparked online, because he talked about how the strike was really difficult, how he doesn't make what he calls fuck you money in the industry, which is like, I can do whatever I want kind of money, and how he has all these accolades, but he doesn't have his EGOT like a lot of these other celebrities. And so in a lot of ways, you can see in Porter's own language, it seems like a pivotal time in his career to get some of the success that he either rightfully or unrightfully so feels like is justified for him as like a Black queer person. But the danger of assimilation is that your personal success is at the expense of other people's collective misery. To say that your individual progress matters more than the policing tactics that are shared by the United States and Israel, to say it matters more than the 38,000 plus Palestinians that have been killed since just October 7th, not even since 1948, to negate the fact that over 80,000 Palestinians have been injured in brutal and horrific ways. Children shot in the head, children, massive burns all over their body, hanging off of like decimated buildings. To ignore the specifics of that for your own success, to lie about James Baldwin, to me, it's doing the work of supremacy and colonization. And beyond even that, I think it's important in the internet age where there's so many hot takes and we're always trying to respond. I always think it's important to model, how do we talk about these things? How do we name the specifics? How do we show a blueprint of what it means to critique how our people are doing wrong, what the systems around us are doing wrong, what our government is doing wrong? And so as an organizer, as a writer, as a revolutionary, as someone that cares about liberation, all of those things just make the practice of talking about these things online like necessary and useful for me, because it helps me like in conversations in my regular life. But all of those things kind of converged. And I mean, I was kind of looking for a lot of more long form content online about it. I was looking for people trying to go hard about it, and I didn't really see it. And I've read about Baldwin. I care about him. I've traveled to France. I spent
You know more about Baldwin than Billy Porter does at
Definitely.
this point.
I could do more than pull up a quote in an acceptance speech. And so all of those things just made me going, I don't even think what I'm doing is going hard, because I'm like, I was a boycott organizer in Seattle for a year. Like I could be hanging off of buildings, doing things, all kinds of stuff. Like I have stood outside of storefronts and yelled at people going inside, berated them for breaking like a strike line. So it's like, if I can do that, I mean, what's the difference between that and like presenting a nuanced kind of critique online? So that's how I kind of came to it. And I think naturally, as a essayist, as someone that has written a whole book that's nonfiction, like the process of research and aggregating information and figuring out, like a lot of what I try to do is like frame the videos I present around like questions. Like there are questions I kind of sprinkle throughout each section to kind of elicit a conversation. And so some of the conversations with Porter that I'm interested in is, why do Black people not believe that we can be colonizers? What do we sacrifice in our goal of Black progress? How is aligning with Americanism also making us the fucking enemy? Because it is. And I think all of those things are deeply important. And we're in a time where these questions matter, because we're all heading off a cliff of fascism and repression. It's like, how are we going to prepare for this? Like, if fascism is on the rise and a part of fascism is historical erasure, how do we confront it?
Yeah, and I think you said it very well. You know, when we being from the African diaspora, when we put ourselves in a position to cater and pander, i.e., shuck and jive for the system, all we're doing is pandering to the continuation of white hegemony. I don't like to use the term white supremacy because the only thing there's supreme in is destruction, famine, and everything of the sorts. Hegemonic in ways, that can, it's another conversation. But I think what I get from your analysis, from your videos, just to kind of touch on like how you said, you sprinkle certain questions. They're questions that I raise myself too, from watching, after watching your videos. And so for one, I just want to say thank you for your analysis, because as much as people might say that this is sparking a conversation that does not need to be had, I think it does, because we're dealing with individuals that are, i.e., co-opting whole ass lifestyles and trying to say, no, this is, it didn't happen like this, it's going to happen like this. So I think when it comes to your analysis of this topic, it really, for me, resonates why we should care and why we need to have more conversations about this. And it, truthfully too, I do a show called Decolonial Parallels, and on that show I discuss the parallels between like Dune. That's like some white savior shit. When you look at Frank Herbert and you look at the connections that he had to indigenous communities, or to an individual that had connections to indigenous communities, and then his said connections to homophobia, um, white saviorship, just trying to say that indigenous community needs a white savior in order for them to, as an indigenous person, I'm like, nah, I'm not going to sit here and allow that type of narrative to go around, because now you have individuals looking at the Dune that just came out with Timothy Kamala, I can never say his last name.
Timothée Chalamet.
Timothy. That this is what like liberation looks like, and people look at these movies and they don't really understand that these movies are there to mislead and manipulate us, and they do it by trying to say that it's okay for like galactic fucking settler colonialism to be a thing. And so through your analysis of James Baldwin, I was able to, with my friend Ryan, be able to make just a one-off show that we do every a Saturday for that. So I just want to say thank you for that, because you have been able to open open my analysis a little bit further. I'd like to, if we can, discuss the video that circulated about Billy Porter, and if I could get your analysis of it. And I'm pretty sure you know what video that I'm talking about. So at this said Juneteenth concert, where they essentially are praising God, for which, if if me, I'm not a God follower, I'm not atheist either. I don't believe in colonial spiritual constructs as such. And so they're singing the song and whatnot, and then he goes and he turns and kisses his hand. But it's like the last 5 seconds for me that really resonates, because it's like he knows exactly what he did, and he's seeing if people reacted to it just right now. Like, he's gonna look around, look that way, and for me, I take this as a moment of why why do this. So if I could, what did you get out of this? I know that you have a video and I haven't watched it yet, I'll just be completely honest.
Yeah. I mean, me being honest, I haven't even seen this full clip. I've seen the photo, so even seeing this clip, it's just I mean, it's a lot of things. I mean, I think if we're looking at it from the perspective of Baldwin, he wrote numerous pieces. He did numerous talks about the artist's integrity, the artist's struggle for integrity. He questioned what is the role of the artist, and kind of some of the conclusions that he comes to is like the role of the artist is to bear witness to the atrocities or things happening around us, to reflect that back and to remove the illusions of our world, of our structures, of our institutions. And then he also says that the responsibility of the artist is to kind of mine oneself, be honest, reflect. Because if you haven't processed or healed, how can you bring meaningful artwork to other people? And what I see with this is just like I believe there's a very large area of the Black elite, the Black artist elite that perform a kind of progressive politics, but when you actually look at the spaces that they're in, the people that they're cohabitating with, the people that they're trying to do business with, these are capitalists. These are people that have to have ideas about economics that are conservative or are based in a kind of Black capitalism, or this like idea of Black autonomy that is in line with capitalism, that is in line with hoarding resources, that is in line with not having a deeper kind of conscious perspective around like work, labor, Black liberation, XYZ. And what I see with Porter is like Black queer men who's survived a lot, who's witnessed the AIDS crisis, who's HIV positive, who in many ways I think he's poised himself as a pillar of representation. And the spaces that he's in, colluding with Byron Allen of Allen Media Group, who's like worth over $70 million to try and make this film. To me, it's just like birds of a feather flock together. So if you're going to the White House, if you're going to meet all these politicians, either you're the kind of Black person that believes that we need to burn down the plantation, or you believe in one of the many narratives of Black progress given to us by Americanism. And so, and I don't know. To me, it's just like Porter is very much in the class of like, I'm a representative of the community. I advocate for AIDS. Like, he's getting awards from different organizations. So in a lot of ways, I think he's propping himself up as a pillar of representation, and he sees that as a good thing. And even throughout his interviews, you can see like he's like, I'm about peace. I'm about unity. Like, I don't think the violence that's happening over there should be happening. And like what those terrorists did was bad. And maybe the reaction is overkill. So what you see in this pursuit of like personal progress or certain kind of Black queer progress is a flattening of history, a disregard for the specifics of history, and then aligning yourself with the elite. Because to me, it's almost like based off of this, the other question I ask is like, where's Porter headed? Who are you going to be in community with? Who are you accountable to? And I bet it's not most of the cast of Pose, because some of them have been liking some of my Instagram reels. And so what I really see here is just like, it's literally like the biggest contradiction of representation. It's Pride Month. It's a Juneteenth concert. You're at the White House, which is a building that has been built by slaves, and you're chucking and jiving next to Joe Biden, next to Kamala Harris. And so I think in this clip, I would just maybe even ask Porter, like, could you explain the history of systemic racism? Could you explain how Joe Biden in the past has wielded the super predator mythology to push for over policing of poor and Black communities? Could you explain what it means to like be subversive and be in resistance and to be in a much larger and longer lineage of liberation? Because what I see here is a Black man struggling to get a seat at the table when I think it's vile. And you mentioning like him looking around at, to me, it's just like, it's just evil. It's just evil. I don't know. It's June. It's a Juneteenth concert.
It's looking for any amount of attention, again, to say, hey, this is what, and I guess you said it very well, representation, thinking he is a pillar of representation, and in all actuality, you are a pillar for white hegemony. You are a pillar that in part is a part of why our people aren't able, why i.e. Even just individuals in general aren't able to have a livable wages, why reparations isn't what it should be, why we're looking at it through a capitalist lens, and really that's a stimulus check, as I've said for years. That he represents the individuals that believe that the system is not flawed. It's just a tire with a little bit of holes in it. But guess what? We sell patches,
Yeah.
and that's not even, that's not going to fix it.
Yeah,
And
and I think to add to that, I think to kind of jump off of that and what I was saying earlier, I think when people prop themselves up as pillars of representation, it's kind of like when you see like someone who's like a first or a second of winning a reward, like how I think there was a speech I saw where Porter quoted James Baldwin, and Porter was like, "I'm not supposed to be here, and I've had to vomit up a lot of filth," and I think the mythos of like getting to the top and feeling like you're one of the few and seeing this as a sign of progress, I think what a lot of people miss out on is like the gatekeeping along the way that locked you out. The fact that so many aspects of these systems that Billy Porter is entering or trying to benefit from or succeed in, those systems actively lock out and denigrate other people. But to ignore that denigration for your own success, like to your point, it's kind of like in line with this like supremacist kind of like mindset or a colonial mindset, because yeah, I just believe like if we're gonna demand any kind of progress, and I don't even like the word progress because I think it should be liberation,
right.
we have to be specific about what our enemy is. And I think to your point, it's like I don't even necessarily think that Porter doesn't think that there are things wrong with the system. I think that Porter believes that them having their success is a sign that what they did it can be more possible for other people. And I think selling that myth is misleading, it's disingenuous, and it's also doing the
Thank
work
you.
of capitalism and white supremacy and white hegemony, whatever terms we want to use. And that is the problem to me, because to tell that lie of progress while also literally being ignorant about struggles that are related to how Black people have had to survive over policing or subjugation or extrajudicial killings by the state. Like there is so much solidarity and similarity between the Black struggle for liberation and the Palestinian struggle for liberation, and to ignore that for your own progress in the belly of the beast, like it's I don't know, it's a historical process of assimilation that's playing out right in front of us. And I think just because it's someone who is non-binary or queer or is wearing a weave, I mean that's just making it look a little prettier. It's the same thing.
So I have these little clips that I have on the back burner, and when I say something or a guest says something, I like to play them. So
Tell me when I'm telling lies.
uh you said there's one word that I would like to expound upon on on what you just said that I'm gonna and I completely agree with, is the myth. Dr. Jared Ball from Black Liberation Media, formerly known as Black Power Media, has a book called The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power. And it's basically, it outlines how Black capitalism is it's a myth. It's a myth, and all it does is propagate more of white consumption, white hegemony, more of white elites. And all we do is we put these token individuals in place that say, hey, well, if you work within the system, this is what you can get. You can have your Lambo truck, you can have your mansion, you can have your pension, your this, your that, you can have your your stocks, not knowing that stocks are directly tied to selling off the workers' labor rights, like literally. And so when I look at Billy Porter, I look at, he is propagating the myth of Black buying power by saying, hey, look, I'm an individual who has, lived through the AIDS epidemic. I'm non-binary. I'm a singer. I'm an actor. I'm all of these things. And in the midst of that, I'm Black. And this is what excellence looks like when you go through the belly of the beast, and when really it's not belly of the beast. What you've done is just conform. You've just conformed to a society that has told you that the only way that you get representation, or some type of representation, because again, it's going to be filtered to, again, appease and not oppose white hegemony. uh he just puts himself in a position that makes him look like a fool. And so I'm kind of glad that I was able to have you at least on to articulate an analysis from someone who, I'm just going to be completely honest with you, I was nervous as shit. You got like 17,000 views on one of your videos, and I was not prepared for any of that type of flooding. I was like, what did I get myself into?
People are mad. People are mad.
Yeah, and
Oof.
but I think that this is a valid topic, and I think it needs to be pushed further. And to push it further, there's also a petition that is out right now to stop Billy Porter from making a Baldwin biopic. But even more, there's actually, and I'd like if you could, maybe you know a little bit more about this project than I do. There's an actual legit biopic that it will be coming out. Could you give us any news on who who may be writing it, and who's actually playing James Baldwin? I think that's who I I really care about the most.
Yeah, you mean with the Billy Porter biopic or other things that are out there?
I believe there's another biopic that you referenced in a video that you
Oh
made.
yeah. I mean, there's a content creator called Queen of Ratchet. I actually interviewed them about a year or two ago because I was basically like looking at, I don't know, the utility of like how people are, I don't know, seem to be going hard for James Baldwin over the last like 6, 7, 8, 9 years with like Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates and I'm Not Your Negro and If Bill Street Could Talk. And so I was interested in like, how are people commemorating his legacy online? And so there is a content creator named Queen of Ratchet. They have been working for about the last 2 or 3 years to independently fundraise for an indie biopic about James Baldwin that they're co-writing with other people that they know. They're planning to lead act in it. I remember as far as when I interviewed them about a year and a half ago, they mentioned that they were like in the process of filming some of the preliminary scenes. And so, yeah, I mean, to that point, it's also interesting when I post as much as I do online about it, and people are like, "Why are you complaining? Why don't you write it? Or you should play him? Or why are you complaining?" I'm like, I'm doing the part that I feel justified to do. But there are other people out there interested in depicting James Baldwin. Like even recently, there was a show, I think it's called Truman versus Capote, or there's like some Amazon series that came out recently about a white writer who is in community with all these other like women, and basically it's about like this period of time and the gender politics and the literary politics. And there is an episode of that show where an actor portrays James Baldwin visiting this white writer and kind of holding him to task for like whether or not he should call out these white elite people. And I watched that and I found that to be like a really moving and stirring depiction. And so I think also with like some of how people are responding, they're like, why just let Billy Porter do it? Like, we gotta let our people work. Like, you don't know until you see it. I'm like, I don't need to fucking see it. I can make an educated guess. And there's other people out here doing shit that need support. And so I think there's also the question of like, we have to look at like when money is thrown at something, what does that tell us under capitalism? And does that mean that it's an authentic project? Does it mean that it's a dilution of something? Does it like, I don't know. And so I think there's also like the paper trail aspect of like, I think we also have to question like when we're analyzing these projects and looking at like Black capitalism versus Black autonomy. Because I feel like when people say Black capitalism, I'm always like, and then I try to think of like what the more anarchist word for me is. And I'm like, oh, you mean Black autonomy? Like non-hierarchical Black autonomy? And they're like, no. And so I think like looking at money, where the money is, like how difficult it is for certain projects to happen. You can actually look at like who's gatekeeping, and like usually if something is being gate kept, especially if it's like a more indie thing, there's a chance that it's probably more authentic and good. But yeah, there is that content creator Queen of Ratchet who's I think on TikTok and Instagram and other platforms, and they have a GoFundMe, I believe. So folks should check that out if they don't already know about it.
Yeah, so just going to be truthful, this is where the thought-provoking questions come in. I was holding back. In the realm of capitalism, how important or unimportant is it for us to portray our radical thinkers, and should they be portrayed within the context of Hollywood media?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a good question. And that's also a good question because I just recently I literally before this, I was editing a podcast episode for this podcast I run, The Dugout, where we just watched 1996's Set It Off. And we've literally been talking about this, like, is this a radical film? Can Hollywood do this? Is it possible? Why or why not? I think it's useful under capitalism. I mean, I think there are a lot of considerations to the question. I think one, in the internet age and with mass consumption, there is this element of how we tend to consume on the internet where we don't think about what the production element of things are. And I think with the Me Too movement and the recent actor and writer strike, there has been some, I guess, more serious mainstream discussion about like the labor conditions and the working conditions and the context of how things are produced. I think that's important. And I think under capitalism, a lot of these projects that are trying to portray radical histories, there are a lot of like really serious contradictions on a production level or in the setup of it. Like I'm thinking of Judas and the Black Messiah, which was a biopic about Fred Hampton / the snitch that set him up to get fucking murdered. And how like it's a movie about the Black Panthers, but Jay-Z's on the soundtrack. He sold crack to his mom. So I mean, like, what do we talk about here? And so I think on a production level, we can look at like, I think under capitalism, when these radical narratives exist, it's important as like revolutionaries or radicals or anarchists or whatever, people that care about liberation, to study and be specific about what these contradictions are. Like even with watching Set It Off, I learned that it took like 3 years to get the film greenlit because a lot of people in Hollywood didn't think that an action film led by 4 Black women would be marketable. There were all sorts of additional scenes that were supposed to be in the film to contextualize these 4 women's relationship, especially like the mother in the film, Titi. After that film, Queen Latifah put in her contract as an actress that she would not die in any future movies because, of course, if you've seen Set It Off, you know it ends like Thelma and Louise. Like it's like, oh Lord, basically. I mean, one person survives, and so I think one, there's the pre-production element that I think is necessary to like think about, analyze, critique, and that's why like that's kind of what I've been doing. I'm like, as a boycott organizer, like if something is going into the market that I think is fucked up and more people should know about, it should be known. Like that lack of transparency isn't helpful. And then I think in terms of like how it's executed, how it shows up, I think there is a contradiction in mainstream media, Hollywood, between what's necessary to tell a compelling story as far as like how narrative is given to us in the Western world versus what is necessary to tell an authentic radical story. Meaning like when I was watching Set It Off, like there were so many decisions where me and my friend were like, if you're expropriating, like you should probably be masking up differently and maybe not like use a stolen car. Or, like if you're going to steal, don't do your trademark of throwing your CDs out the thing. And then in the last bank heist, like one of them was like, get more money, get more money. And then the time it took them to get more money, the cops showed up and blew one of them away. And so I think like even watching that, I was like, oh, as a writer, as someone that loves stories, I know why they did this. But as a radical, as a revolutionary, as someone that's deeply invested in what expropriation can mean and what it can mean for revolutionary movements, I saw mistakes. And so if it's Hollywood, if it's storytellers, if it's marketers that aren't organizers or revolutionaries, what things are they going to miss? What possibilities in terms of the narrative are they gonna like skip over or not understand in terms of security culture or hood culture? Like even to Set It Off, like when Queen Latifah pulled the gun on her friend, my friend who like has like just been way more in the streets than I ever have been, he was just like, I mean, in terms of like hood culture, like you get killed for doing that. And so it's like that didn't happen in the movie, but why not? Because these women needed to find some kind of resolution before the third act. And so I do think there is a utility, and I do think movies that depict radical histories like in a more authentic way can serve as flashpoints for people. Like I know for me, when I was a senior in college and the Black Lives Matter movement popped off even more after Michael Brown was killed, that was when Selma came out. And you can have any of your critiques of that movie, but that's a movie I rewatch to ground myself in a certain kind of history, to tell myself, this shit is hard, it's traumatic, but what else is there other than giving up? And I think radical media, it can humanize why people get radicalized, and it can also be a reminder to people that are already radicalized and doing this work, like these things matter. But then there's the other side, like I saw Bad Boys 4, like 2 days ago, and that's totally propaganda. And how much money did that make? And is it considered a radical narrative because these are cops that had to kind of put away their badges to get the job done? Yeah, but I think you. I mean, it's a necessary question, and I mean, I guess I'd turn the question back to you. What's your perspective?
I've been reading National Security Cinema, so to kind of actually compound on what you were talking about, I agree with you, but I also have to highlight, and here I go talking slow like Norman Finkelstein so that I can articulate what I need to say, what's in my mind right now. National Security Cinema has outlined just a few of the truths and actual connections that the DoD has within cinema now. I haven't read Dr. Horn's book that just recently supposed to come out on Hollywood. Um, and so I would say I agree with you, but we also have to understand within the constructs of capitalism that we're like easily prone to things not being like you stated, not being put in the movie simply because it does not appeal white hegemony. um and this goes across the board for not just media but also like sports too. I just came out with an article last a week and a half ago on the WNBA and Caitlin Clark and this whole reverse racism bullshit, and how they're essentially trying to say that this white woman could be racially profiled when in actuality that's not even something that ideologically could happen. And any person who comes up with that conclusion is the right person, and any person who doesn't come up with that conclusion, you obviously need some schooling. And that's not a knock on your part. That just simply is, there's no such thing as reverse racism. And so I see, and I actually have the book near me because I'm going to be doing a recording. So this is the book that I'm talking about for any individuals that are out there, National Security
Ooh.
Cinema. And it deals with how the Marvel Cinematic Universe is essentially like they receive like millions of dollars, i.e., are some of the budget for the military goes into making these movies. So I would have to say I completely agree, with you, but I do have my areas that I do need to highlight for certain movies that I feel like how you said, like Bad Boys 2, that is obviously the militarization of cops that is trying to propagate that cops are good. Look, that this bad stuff happens and who's going to come and save the day. Like this is some 1980s Miami Vice type shit. And in all actuality, the people who normally help communities that go through, say someone being shot or killed, someone being ran over by a car that's speeding, a drunk driver. It's the community, and the community does not mean nor does it have or is incorporated with the police departments, because the police departments uphold the state. They are the state. And so I would say yeah, but there are some things that damn, you turned my own fucking question back on me, and I've never had that before.
I'm an interviewer too. I know how to interview. Yeah, and I mean, I think what you're saying is necessary and interesting because there's like layers to what is funded in Hollywood and how and why.
Mhm.
And I think you're speaking to like a much more structural connection that the US government, that our military has to Hollywood. Like I think some people can kind of peripherally say, like, oh yeah, like there's probably rules about policing or the military or how it can be depicted
Mhm.
on screen. But to your point, like there's literally guidelines and funding that incentivizes these large scale projects. It's like, why is Gal Gadot getting paid all this money and you're a Zionist?
That
Or,
why
or
is Michael Bay asking for $600,000 of America's taxpayers' dollars so that he could blow some shit up when we have people
Mhm.
out on the street that need food, that don't have houses, that don't have adequate mental health
Yeah.
needs, they don't have any access to health care, they have no access to food, water, all of the sorts. All the while we have people like fucking Gavin Newsom, who, I'm from California, I live in Las Vegas right now. Who's like, we had a record-breaking, record-breaking tourism. A portion of that was because we were boycotting, divesting, and telling motherfuckers to not come to this fucking state,
Yeah.
i.e., by shutting shit down.
Yeah.
So I look at these movies that essentially are coming out, and they're propagating a lot of this white savior shit. And they're also trying to sprinkle in like how they're doing with James Baldwin. We're going to give you what we think is radical, like we have the Apple series with, about Huey P. Newton. That's told from a white man's perspective, and has nothing to do, has
Wait, have
no
you seen
connection.
it?
I have not seen it, and I will not see it. The fact that people are trying to like say, well, Don Cheadle is a producer. I don't give a shit if Don Cheadle is a producer on that. I
I
do
feel like
not
I
care.
have to see it. I have to see it, even though I know I don't want to.
Eh,
Yeah.
I think when I seen when I seen Bayard Rustin's um biopic and there was no mention of him being an avid Zionist, I was like, yeah,
Mhm.
this is obviously the problem. And then they did the same thing with, and I forget her name. She ran for president in the 70s.
Oh, Shirley.
Shirley, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I forget her. They like completely shitted on Stokely Carmichael in that movie. Like no mention of him, but a mention, like it was like not saying the quiet part out loud. And so I was like, yeah, no, this they obviously within the realm of these movies, especially like when you look at Netflix is a company that is rooted in white hegemony, expanding, the mind of individuals into believing that, we when we can like just go and fucking cause planetary fucking settler colonialism, within the movement, our movies, and this is completely okay. Like I seen a movie I don't know if you watched it, called Ender's Game. um
Oh, I
it's
haven't seen that yet.
it's literally a movie about trafficking children through militarization, forcing them to play video games
Oh, I have
that
seen that.
forcing them to play video games. In part, the video games are like actual real life fucking planets that they're like just obliterating. They're just obliterating colonies of like
Wow.
fucking aliens, and telling
See,
these kids that they're playing games.
I'm
And
glad you
it's
explained that to me because I've tried to watch that movie like 4 times and I know I finished it. It was too sci-fi for me. I was like, what the fuck is going
it's
on? Come
literally
on,
a movie
right?
about it's literally a movie about aliens that are oddly reminiscent to
Yeah.
ants, and all they're searching for is water.
Yeah.
And so they
Yeah.
come to Earth seeking water. And what does America do? What does the whole world do? That's mass, it's riddled in imperialism, militarization, 1,000 military bases. That's just America alone. That's not just Russia. It doesn't include Russia and China and all these other countries that have deep
Yeah.
military militaries. um and they all band together to come and fight these aliens, but they use the kids. So they see like the kids play video games. So again, it's like when I break it down, like I try and make it a little, I try and make it make sense, for individuals.
Yeah.
Like look, like they're like within our eyes, like saying that it is okay to like manipulate a child into
Yeah.
believing the same way that they did in real life through
Mhm.
like Call of Duty. I can remember playing Call of Duty as a kid, like Black Ops, Call of Duty, Ghosts, and all that. And you look at the maps, and the maps were literally fucking Gaza, were Yemen, were Iraq, but
Oh,
like 2025, 2024. And it's like you look at now, and it's like, oh shit, they were
selling the
like,
future.
I wouldn't even necessarily say telling the future. I would just in part say that like the manipulating kids into believing that this is what it is. This is how we survive, is by obliterating countries, causing famine, settler colonialism, occupations across the globe. And that's like that's one of the main reasons why this Billy Porter, James Baldwin movie, I think I'm not gonna let up on it. I will essentially give my own, what I have backlogged on research that I feel is genuine enough to prove, like, hey, like, yeah, this dude's not someone who's trustworthy. Um,
Yeah.
because
And I guess to add it to everything you're saying, I think to kind of expand what we're talking about, I guess it really just makes me think about like one, there's like the function of media and art and stories as we know it, like how it's presented to us, how it goes through the industry or the different industries, capitalism, Hollywood, etc. But I also think about, and I guess I wonder where your head is with this, but I think about like how there's been so many dystopian or apocalyptic narratives that have come up over the last 10 to 15 years. I mean, I think about the fact that we were still are experiencing COVID-19, but
mm,
at more of like the global height of it, like in 2020, 21, like there were movies coming out about the pandemic, like some of them satirizing it, some of them dramatizing it. I think about like the Hunger Games. I think about the most recent Hunger Games like prequel that kind of shows the fascist authoritarian leaders like beginnings. And I guess when I watch a lot of these things, it's interesting, and maybe you relate, but I think about like how some people go to these pieces of media and they might leave being a little bit more radicalized and more ready to act or to do something, or it elicits something in them that makes the next opportunity to like, I don't know, organize or be a part of a liberation movement or just like intervene in like a radical way, versus people that go to these pieces of media and see it as something that comforts them in a messed up world. Like, oh, there are people out there that fight for social change or revolutions. Like, and I think that's what some of these biopics or some of these pieces of media are. It's like this white person can be a revolutionary, or this black person in history can be a revolutionary. But I guess to your point earlier about like what I think like a radical media is or a radical narrative is, I think it's media that goes like a little step further. Like it has a structural analysis, but there's some element of it that is compelling the viewer to look at their own world and to maybe
Yeah.
act or operate differently. And I guess I just wonder like what that is. Is it like, I mean, it's probably like a combination of like whatever someone's context is when they go to see those things. But I think to your point, it's like, how do we as people that want liberation react to these pieces of media in a way that can like compel people to do more, to be inspired, to act after they consume these pieces of media? And that's where I think like cultural criticism or cultural analysis can be necessary. But I guess I wonder like, what is it, do you think, that might make someone go to like a movie like The Hunger Games or Judas and the Black Messiah, and they'll leave kind of being like, oh, this is like a part of our actual reality, and now I have a responsibility?
Yeah, good, good question. I would, I would put it on we as a society. I mean, like, I'll go and I'm gonna throw a shocker to you. You know, your favorite movie, from my knowledge, is the Titanic. You know, you watch that movie, and that movie probably resonates with you in a way that it does differently with somebody else. I feel like for me, growing up, I have used movies to escape or escape certain realities. So
Mm.
like for instance, there's times where I didn't have cable, you know, or if we did have cable, I didn't have on demand, I didn't have all these things, so I couldn't watch these movies. I didn't, you know, I you know, so I grew up on VHS. I grew up on, you know, literally popping in and popping out whatever movies I wanted to watch. James and the Giant Peach, you know, Adventures in Babysitting, all of that. And I think for if in order to answer this, I would have to go from a personal perspective. Is like when I watch a movie like The Hunger Games, I don't gain any type of like, oh my god, like I need to, you know, liberate myself. I need to. What I get from it now, I would have to say is that this is these are they're like playing with us. These are stoic realities that we are seeing. When you look at Hunger Games, her standing behind a whole ass hospital in the movie, and they're actually being hospitals are being blown up in Gaza. So again, I feel like it's a manipulation into getting people to believe that this is normal. So that's why they put out, you know, the Hunger Games is saying, well, this is normal, this is normal, this is normal. And it's not
Mhm.
normal to see children be blown up. It's not normal to have famine. It's not normal to have districts, i.e., states, that are run their own fucking program. They do their own fucking thing. They're ran by goons, and in part that inflicts terror, oppression, gentrification onto communities like our communities, from the African diaspora, from my communities that's indigenous. So, you know, like using, I would even go as further is like movies and media play a fine line in who gets represented and when they get represented. And I can give you examples as is how many fucking movies with indigenous representation have came out just in the last fucking 10 years
Mhm.
versus how many came out 10 years prior. Not a
Yeah.
whole lot. So again, co-opting cultures is a big part of why people are latched into media, why they're latched into these these movies, these series, like the Hunger Games, the prequels, like how like with Bad Boys, wanting to watch those movies is because
Yeah.
it glorifies everything that the system wants to glorify. It wants people to believe that these are that this is needed. Now, when you look at it from the constructs of the Judas and the Black Messiah, I just think that's them throwing a fucking bone and watering down liberation to the point where it's not liberation, it's really liberalism because of the way that the movie was constructed.
Yeah.
um
Liberation Light.
and so if that was to answer your if I did answer your question, I would say, is that media plays a huge role in how we feel about certain situations. So if you put a movie out there about, like, I mean, we had the movie on Netflix about Farha, and all of the Zionists were like, we don't want that movie out there. Obviously, you don't want that movie out there because it shows and depicts when the British literally occupied fucking Gaza. It literally shows fucking whole ass babies being shot, and this is the realization that this is what happened. And so
Yeah.
I do feel like in that instance they throw bones to please certain demographics of people, but the main goal at heart is to make people realize that the only way that you gain liberation is through a white lens. And I think
Mhm.
that is, for me, where I would have to draw the line and make the analysis that no, I will never be liberated through a white lens. You will never be liberated through a white lens.
Yeah.
Liberation is something that I also think has been co-opted. The term in of it itself has been co-opted. We have people saying that they're abolitionists, that they're revolutionaries and whatnot, saying, "Oh, Kim Kardashian is a fucking abolitionist." How the fuck is she an abolitionist? People
She's
saying
something, but she ain't an abolitionist. She's a prison reformist.
at this, to say the least. I would even to say the least. To round about your question, I do feel like media plays a huge role in getting people to feel riled up,
Yeah.
getting people to feel warmth when I'm feeling fucking low, and when I just don't want to fucking talk to nobody and whatnot. I'll literally turn on Eat Pray Love. I'll go and I'll put on Burnt. I'll go and I'll put on Adventures in Babysitting, Legal Eagles, all of these 1980s
Yeah.
aesthetic movies. um I'll go and I'll put them on, and they make me feel a little bit better, and that's just that. I feel like that's a part of me personally, my childhood, just me solely relying on movies, when I wanted, comfort. And then a big part of it now is that I love movies because I love, like, breaking down and pointing out, like, Leonardo DiCaprio pointing at the TV, like, look, that's where we should be, where we should stop, and we should analyze what they literally just tried to manipulate us into believing.
Yeah.
So if that answered your question,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
uh,
It's a big question. And I don't think I necessarily have an answer because it's almost like the chicken or the egg thing. Like it's like the same thing. Like if someone saw someone getting beaten up in the street, what makes some people like care enough or like to be critical of it, or some people who just watch and are like, oh, they probably deserved it, or and I don't know. And I think it's just yeah, I just want more for our people, for our
mm,
histories, and I think this Billy Porter James Baldwin biopic, I could just see it opening up the floodgates for so many other forms of co-optation
thank you. I
and
mean,
just
Stokely Carmichael. If I see a trailer for the Stokely Carmichael biopic, I'm gonna lose it. I'm gonna
it's going to
lose it.
happen. It's going to
And eventually it's gonna. And again, thank you for outlining that. It's gonna happen eventually,
happen.
because we have never really underline the true primary contradictions, that we live under a settler colonial occupation that
Yeah.
will always put consumption via, the means of capitalism above everything. Consumption, expansion via imperialism, um, that'll always come first. And so, when we look at the movies are just a tool for them now to make money and dilute, history, and we also have to look at, it's his story, so it's patriarchal, told through the lens, told through a white lens. And so I just feel like we can make good movies, we can make good biopics, but we have to be very, very critical on who not just plays these individuals, i.e. Billy Porter not being, doesn't make the cut. I'm sorry. Um, and individuals that also have that same kind of intellect, that same understanding that James Baldwin had. Because I mean, for you to play an individual, man, that has sparked so many individuals to then create their own careers, their own writing careers, like yourself, like myself, for individuals to then use their works to then justify what they can no longer fight against, and it's to justify why we need liberation, to justify why we need to understand what decolonization is, why we need to understand why this fucking system ain't shit for nobody. And so when I see someone like Billy Porter, who has none of these accolades, has none of these aesthetics, who can't, couldn't, tie your shoes, couldn't tie my shoes, when it comes to, holding, the what I mean, I'm pretty sure you've gone to protest. That's been your whole embodiment of being an activist. Me myself as well, has never put themselves in a position to be fearful about being fucking arrested by the fucking cops, to being beat the fuck out of via going to the fucking cell, or being
if Billy Porter or other elite people they forget it, or they brush it aside in order to get ahead.
Exactly, and I'm hoping that we can really understand why these biopics need to be thoroughly looked at, and they need to be, if there needs to be like a board or something if we're going to be making these biopics, like there needs to be like a set group of people like within the realm of media, they're like, and within radical media, if we're going to be making biopics, and they have to be truthful. And I think the individual that you highlighted earlier, I'm going to look up, and I mean, if you're vouching for them, then I think that's something that individuals should go and sign up for as well. I had one last question to ask you, and it just was relative to Israel and Gaza and the encampments, and I think that might be a good way for us to wrap this up, because I really don't want to keep you for too long. We are seeing right now across the board just an all-out assault against peaceful protesting via these encampments. And I know you, if I'm not mistaken, have gone to one of these encampments, and have seen for yourself essentially the fucking brutality, the just all out barbaric force that is used by these policy officers. And so I'd like to get you to if you could, to outline, for those individuals that are within the diaspora that say that Black struggle is not connected or isn't intrinsically connected to Palestine, which is foolish to say. What are your thoughts on individuals that think like that, and what are some tools and the best needs for people to be able to not just combat, but also put themselves in a position to potentially kind of persuade, i.e. teach individuals like, no, these are intrinsically connected. We are seeing the same instruments and tools and tactics being used on these students are being used in the West Bank, are being used in Gaza, whether it be tear gas, whether it be the manufacturing companies like Elbit Systems that work with America and have active factories in Israel. So what are your thoughts on, one, individuals that say that the Black struggle is not intrinsically connected to Palestine, and two, how do, i.e. individuals like myself, individuals like you, combat and, i.e. kind of teach in a way that gets people to be more informed on why we are connected?
Yeah, no, that's an amazing question, and it's been a lot of what I've been researching and trying to articulate. I think there's a lot of different angles and responses, but I think first, I think it's important when we're engaging with people that say things like that, it's important to assert what our end goal is. And I think a lot of the times when Black people talk to each other, sometimes we assume that our end goal is the same, and that end goal is like, we just need to survive, or maybe it's liberation or progress. And each of those are very different end goals. And I think when a lot of people say like, that's not about us, doesn't have nothing to do with us, like when the Palestinians stood up for us, or like we can't stick our necks out for other people, XYZ, it's based in an assumption that survival is the best that we can hope for. And I think one, it's important to disagree with that. It's important to assert why just surviving has literally been antithetical to Black liberation, Black autonomy, any form of Black progress we've been given. Like, we have to risk our survival in order to actually get to a dignified place in this world. And then I think once you assert that or begin to engage with that, it then becomes the question of, if our goal is liberation, if our goal is being against these systems that are against us, which then it's important to name these systems. Is it white supremacy? Is it Americanism? Is it patriotism? Is it militarism? Is it colonization? Is it capitalism? What are we upending? And whatever it is, if it's some kind of structural evil, I am of the belief that no one community can fight to upend policing or the United States or imperialism or colonization or the various forms of colonization. No one group can overcome it. We need solidarity. We're stronger together. And what the state tries to do, what white supremacy tries to do, what colonization tries to do, what counterinsurgency attempts to do, which has been seen at these recent US encampments, it stokes fear in people. It tells you if you even attempt to resist an atrocity, that you will go to jail, you will be brutalized, you will be traumatized, and that will be the end of it. And the point of solidarity, the point of coming together is that, oh, sorry, I'm getting a weird call.
You're good.
Oh, Lord, hold on.
You're good, you're good.
Okay, 1 second. Oh, Lord. Comrade's calling me. I don't know what they want. Okay, 1 second. Let me just make sure this doesn't happen again. But yeah, to go back to what I was saying, the point of solidarity, of organizing with each other, of taking these chances, of experimenting, is that we begin to really strategize around the different contexts that we come to this work through. Palestinians face police violence. They face over surveillance. They face displacement. They face propaganda, just like Black people do. But it looks different. There's a different context. There are different things feeding it, but there are shared systems that we're against. And so why shouldn't Black people be in solidarity with other marginalized people that also have resources, wisdoms, histories, tactics that are also going against the same systems that are against us? And so I would just wield all of those things. And then, I mean, I think some of that logic that you're presenting, that some Black people think, it's kind of an Afro-pessimist logic, which I think sometimes I fuck with Afro-pessimists. But sometimes I'm like, whoa, do you want Black supremacy or not? Do you want Black separatism or not? I think it also gets into that, which is like a murky area as well, because some people are just like, I don't trust nobody that's not Black. And I'm like, okay, I mean, that's already difficult in itself, or yeah. Right. So I feel like it's a lot of different things. There's so many different ways that you can attack it. But I think my main thing is like, I think we have to challenge the assumption that we enter the conversation with. And then I would just encourage people, like, study, read books about the history of the genocide against Palestinians, read the 100 Years War against Palestine, I think, or there's so many books and texts out there. I think AK Press or some kind of other indie radical press has like a free ebook list. Like, it's also important to educate ourselves so that when we get to these conversations, if someone's like, well, the Jews fought for us and like we have to be Zionists, and I'm like, well, there are Jewish people that aren't Zionist, and there are Jewish people that were with us in the civil rights movement, but because of that context, they understand this is like genocide and apartheid. So like, we can't flatten history. And so I think it's also important to be specific about what we're pushing back against and how history tells us otherwise as well.
Okay. I actually lied to you. I just was looking through my little Post-its, and there's two two more questions.
Yeah, I'm down.
So this question actually can be compounded to the last question I just asked you. I'm pretty sure you're familiar with the name that I'm getting ready to mention. Daruba bin Wahad has called for an action, a call for a united front against fascism. And so tomorrow I'm going to be speaking with Kalanji Changa, who's the co-founder of Black Power Media, to discuss this from my perspective as an Afro-Indigenous individual, and where there might be some things that potentially could be added. And so I would like to ask you, how important and how intrinsically connected should a united front against fascism be, and should it be a united front against fascism or a united front against international imperialism?
Mm. You're asking good questions. I think it's a yes in both answer. I mean, I personally, like, as an anarchist, as someone that has done a lot of anti-fascist work in the past, who's been a part of Black Blocs, I appreciate how I've engaged in anti-fascism, because I think it allowed me to understand anarchism differently, or like in a more deep way, which is we as individuals and collectives have to be in resistance to things that oppress and harm people in our communities, whether that be groups, organizations, the state, XYZ. And so I think fascism is vital because it is always around us. It's always swinging back and forth like a pendulum. And fascism can look like a lot of different things. It can look like repressive legislation. It can look like extrajudicial violence. It can look like erasure, bannings of certain materials or education. It can look like things at the border, immigration policies. Like, there are so many different complex configurations. But I think in terms of, like, I guess I'm thinking of like direct anti-fascism work, like being in a community, blocking up. My take is the state is fascist. So we have to oppose the state. Like, if you're at a protest and the pigs are showing up and they're like, everyone needs to disperse, this is an unlawful gathering, and you're there protesting a police murder, it's like, why would you listen to the state while they're trying to disperse you during a political action that's against the state? And so in my mind, like, I think anti-fascism is vital and necessary because it allows us to look at propaganda. It allows us to look at certain theories of like eugenics or like what's the theory that like supremacists believe, where it's like you got to control these marginalized populations or else contagion theory. Like, I think there's so many logics behind fascism that are useful, are deployed against us, that are in our media, that's in the mainstream. And so I think engaging in anti-fascism, even on like a direct action level, begins to allow us to analyze how it shows up in all of these other institutions in our lives, whether it be policing, education, whether it be media, whether it be our healthcare systems, immigration policies. And then I think, to your point, I don't think anti-fascism just ends there. Like, it's a part of this greater kind of process of resistance, which I think is also in line with like anti-imperialism. Because in my mind, imperialism is like, I mean, anti-fascist or fascism is global, but imperialism to me is much more like, what are the global implications of what we're dealing with locally? And how are the things that we're dealing with locally tied to these like global forms of repression and states and governments? Because to me, anti-fascism is basically like the direct action Black Bloc stuff. It's like you forming your own militia. And then once the revolutionary process is like get deeper, there's the above ground stuff, below the ground stuff. These anti-fascist militias join and form larger configurations of community defense. And then you begin to maybe it leads to like insurrection or a revolutionary process. And so I think, to me, it's not either or. It's like they're tied together. And I personally, like, when I go to protests, I'm like, the police are fascists. So, I mean, are you going to listen to them, or are you going to throw the first brick like they did at Stonewall? Yeah.
No, I think you answered that pretty well, and that's actually along the same lines. I look at it from an indigenous perspective. Is if we're going to look at, a united front against fascism, we also have to look at it's a united front against international imperialism, settler colonialism, capital, all of the isms and ists that are negative, that go together, that, fall in line with each other, or originate, come from each other. And so, I look at, if we're going to have this conversation, then we need to have at least one person who can represent all 1,500, or in some semblance, the 1,500 sovereign indigenous nations that are no longer here that have, whether federally or non-federally, non-state, state recognized. We have to factor that in if we're talking about a united front, because if you're talking about a united front against fascism, you have to really outline, okay, is this a segregated united front against fascism? Is this a and I don't think that it is, because of the individuals that have given their understanding via Claudia de la Cruz, Jill Stein, Dr. West, who I interviewed multiple times, unfortunately. And I say unfortunately because I don't really think he is in it for the right reasons at all.
Yeah.
But the last question that I have is that I know that Titanic is your favorite movie. At least that's from my
it is. Yeah, I watch it
investigating.
I watch it once a year.
How much frustration do you hold towards Rose?
In what way? What are you trying to say?
There's enough room on that. There's enough
Oh,
room.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like this. Maybe this goes to like what makes sense on a storytelling level versus like what is emotionally, or what makes sense on like a logistical level versus like what is storytelling and like cathartic. Her being on that door, holding her own, that's a plot arc. The plot arc is you don't need a man to live. You can learn these lessons from this man. And so in a way, it's actually like really a feminist narrative. Like, let that nigga die. I mean, that's not what I actually think, but from a pro-feminist standpoint, it's like, what you look like sharing a door? Did I want Jack to live? Yes, I would love for him to live. He's one of the archetypes of romance for me. Sharing the door. No, I think she was right.
I just want to say thank you so much for coming on. I hope that I could have you on after I'm done reading your memoir, which I will say page 8 or when just the beginning, when I got to Crystal, I broke down in a way that I've in this chair reading my ebook, looking at my laptop, just like going over what it feels like to have to go through grief, help someone go through someone else's grief, your own personal grief, and at the same time not being able to grieve and really work on yourself. And I just got from the beginning, and I'm not done with it yet, so maybe my interpretation of your book is a little bit wrong. I do apologize.
No, right.
It's for me, the beginning really just made me super emotional. I was like, yo, like this, to know that we need more Black boy stories out there. I'm sorry, but that's just, for me, I'll always say it. We need more Black boy stories. We need more of what we went through as children, which is why I'm in the process of writing my own little personal, so that I could put that out there. This is actually the second book that I've written. There's one book that I have yet to put out there. It's not even been published. It's just my own
nonfiction.
Nonfiction. It's how we combat via our backyard and our front yards against HOAs and recultivate the lands via indigenous, looking at, even like I have a chapter dedicated to like literally called "What the fuck is in your fridge?" And it's what things that are in your fridge that you essentially can grow in your front or your backyard.
Okay.
And how you can at the same time combat HOAs, how I advocate for like collective gardening, which is like, well, shit, now we're gonna get a little bit nosy. What the fuck's in your neighbor's fucking fridge that maybe you could grow, or they could grow, and it just creates this like collective, community aesthetic, the true community aesthetic, where we get back to our base roots, because people forget that supermarkets weren't around during the 1920s and 30s and 40s and shit. Our ancestors grew their own crops, they grew their own, had raised their own cattle, and it wasn't until mass a surplus, I guess, of meat, from what I've gotten from my knowledge, is that they pushed mainstream media, like push these fucking big meat companies and whatnot, because they were losing money. No one was buying meat at a mass level because they were raising their own cattle and whatnot. Now I'm kind of like a semi-vegan, so like I have my own interpretation of that, but I do have a book that has no one's even read it yet, so maybe I can send it to you. Maybe you'd be interested in reading it.
Yeah. I honestly, I'd be curious to read it because I have a lot of friends that do a lot of housing rights work, and a lot of them are interested in how we can look at like housing or just like our basic human needs through a decolonial like
Yeah.
perspective in this pursuit of like attaining human rights for all, but it's like it's all on stolen land. So like,
Yeah,
I don't know.
and
So yeah,
someone in the neighborhood works for the water treatment plant. Maybe we can persuade them to, go and conduct, some type of unionizing, type of work. So
yeah,
that's really what the book kind of outlines. And it outlines just from a community standpoint what people can do in their front and backyard and how that in part could help the community,
yeah,
looking at sidewalks, looking at again HOAs, abolishing HOAs, and if you can't abolish them, you become the HOA. So that's really what it's about. So yeah, maybe I could send it to you, and your comrades could look that over
yeah.
and whatnot. But I want to say thank you again for coming on, and I hope to have you back on soon as I'm done reading your book. Is there anything you want people to be plugged into? I know you got your own podcast. I know you have your own personal YouTube.
Yeah.
I believe you have an insert of essays that are supposed to be coming out, from my knowledge.
Yeah. This month,
So
yeah.
if you could just plug everybody for whatever they need to hone in on Prince Shakur and the amazing work that you do.
Yeah.
So
Well, first I want to say thank you for this whole conversation. I feel like all of your questions were really great, and I love this, and I feel like you're really good at this. So I just want to give you praise and thank you for reading my book. I would love to talk to you about it. Yeah, because I'm just deeply interested in like what other Black folks think about it, especially from your perspective in particular. Yeah, because there's a whole Standing Rock chapter in there, and this, I'd be curious what your thoughts are. But yeah. So more than happy to talk again in the future. But what I'm working on now, where folks can find me, you can find me anywhere on social media, on Instagram at Sweet Black Prince, on TikTok at PR Shakur. I have a YouTube channel that's just my name, Prince Shakur, and I upload videos about Black history, queer perspectives on Black history, the writing life, anti-capitalism. I host a podcast called The Dugout, a Black anarchist podcast, where me and my co-host talk about current events, news, XYZ from our perspective as queer Black anarchists and organizers. Because I do feel like, yeah, it's just important to hold that space, especially as queer people. And then I also have like a short collection of essays coming out about Black history and Black solidarity with Palestine, and that's coming out this month. It's Black Radical Reader. Folks can find it online or on my website at princeshakur.com. But yeah, that's where people can find me.
again, thank you again for coming on, and to the viewers, please go subscribe to do you guys have does the Dugout have a YouTube channel?
Yeah, we have a YouTube channel.
Okay,
Yeah.
so subscribe to their YouTube. I believe you guys have a Spotify. Just got on Apple Music recently. Like you said, your book. So please be out on the lookout, everybody, for that. And yeah, go and actually read if you can get your hands on it. When they tell you to be good, it's a good ass book. I'm gonna read 60 straight pages. So I had to put it down because it was getting to the point where I probably would have finished the book, and it's what I love, when I can find a book that I'm like, you know what, yeah, there's so much shit up in here.
Yeah, you
I
gotta
could
take a break because you're like,
I
I
gotta
want to
take a
finish
break a
this
little
book.
bit.
Yeah.
I gotta scratch my head a little bit because damn, like,
Yeah.
no, I really do appreciate you. And again, everybody go like, share, subscribe, follow. If you could find ways to support him financially, please do so. That's just, as me being someone who's a grassroots writer, and whatnot, I do understand the importance of, sharing and making sure that people get what they, what is needed. So yeah, please do so. This was a great conversation, and I can't wait to have you back on. For the viewers, I want to say I will see you guys on tomorrow, actually, with Kalonji Changa, and we'll be talking about the call for a united front against fascism, where I will be kind of outlining a little bit of what I talked here, but more in depth with Kalonji Changa. I actually fucked up his thumbnail, so I need to say this on live. I apologize. I've been working overtime So I really do apologize for messing up the thumbnails and anybody's name. That was not intentional. But yeah, this was fun, and thank you, Shakur. I will see you guys in the next one.
Please join me in praying that I don't say something we all regret. These are dangerous